Merci de m'avoir invité à vos travaux. Je suis très impressionnée et très heureuse de pouvoir
and very
partager
happy
avec vous
to be able to
cette
share with
thématique
you
des
this
migrations,
topic
qui est un
of
des objets de
migrations,
votre
which is
conférence.
one of the
J'ai
topics
voulu
of your
centrer
conference.
mon propos
I wanted
sur
to
la crise
focus
actuelle
on the
de l'accueil
current
des
crisis
réfugiés
in the reception of refugees,
qui est particulièrement
which is
forte pour l'Europe et
particularly
qui est l'occasion
strong
pour
in
l'Europe
Europe, and which is an
questionner
opportunity
à
for
nouveau les
Europe to
valeurs sur
question
lesquelles il
again
s'est
the
construit, qui sont
values
les
on
valeurs
which
de
it
la
was built, which
solidarité,
are the
qui sont
values
les
of
valeurs du respect des droits
solidarity,
de l'homme,
of
comme le siège
respect
de
for
Genève,
human rights. We are here
le
in
respect du droit
Geneva
d'asile.
on the
Et
respect
on va
for the
voir
right of
que ce
asylum. And
phénomène
we'll
de
see that this
crise ne
phenomenon
découle pas
of
seulement
crisis
de
does
la
not
crise
only
syrienne,
come
mais de
from the
tout un
Syrian crisis, but
ensemble de
also
phénomènes
from many
structurels
structural
qui conduisent non
phenomena
seulement à
which
la
lead not
mobilité,
only to
mais à la
people
mobilité
moving,
de
but
certains flux
also to
sur l'Europe. L'Europe est la
various
première
flows moving into
destination
Europe.
migratoire
Europe
au monde
is
en termes
the
de flux
first
et la
world
seconde en termes de
migration
personnes
destination in
installées.
terms of
Nous
flows,
sommes dépassés sur ce terrain par
and
les États-Unis. On a 42
we
millions
have
environ
42
de migrants en
million
Europe et
migrants in
46
Europe,
millions aux
and there are
États-Unis.
46 million in the
Mais
US. So
l'Europe est
US
une des grandes
is in first
destinations
position,
migratoires
but
au
Europe
monde
is one of the
avec les
big
États-Unis, avec le Golfe, avec la Russie, avec
migration
beaucoup d'autres
destinations,
régions dans
also
le
with
monde.
Russia and the
Et
Gulf
l'Europe,
countries
à la
and many
différence
other
de
areas
quelques
in the
régions du
world.
monde
But Europe,
que j'ai citées,
unlike
comme les
some of
États-Unis ou alors le
the other
Canada
areas that I've
ou l'Australie
cited,
ou la
such as
Nouvelle-Zélande,
New
a du
Zealand,
mal à
Canada,
s'accepter comme
Australia, the
terre
US,
d'immigration.
has
Et ça,
difficulty
c'est une des
accepting
grandes
itself as a land
difficultés
of immigration, and that's one
la
of the great
problématique.
difficulties of
Les
this issue.
Européens ne se
Europeans
considèrent
do
pas
not consider
comme
themselves
habitant une terre
as inhabiting
d'immigration
a land
et
of
ils ont beaucoup de mal à
immigration. They
considérer
find
que
it
les
very
migrants
difficult to consider
contribuent
that
à
migrants
constituer en
contribute to
partie la
constitute
population de
partly
demain
the
en Europe.
population
Le
of
seul
tomorrow
facteur de
in Europe.
croissance
The only
de
growth
la
factor
population en Europe, comme
in
d'ailleurs aux
Europe,
États-Unis,
as
c'est
in the
l'immigration.
US,
Mais
is
c'est un sujet
immigration.
sensible
But
parce que
it's a
pendant très
delicate
longtemps, ce sont
topic
les
because for a very
Européens
long
qui sont
time it's the
partis
Europeans
de
that
chez
have
eux à
left
travers le
home
monde pour
and,
des raisons
and have
diverses.
gone many
Et
places in the world
aussi parce
for
que
various
pendant
reasons,
longtemps,
and also because
l'immigration
for
était
a very long
simplement
time
considérée comme une
immigration was
simple
just
main-d'œuvre
considered as
destinée
a
à
workforce
remplir à court
aimed
terme
at filling
une nécessité
work shortages
simplement sur le
in the
marché
short
du
term.
travail. Donc aujourd'hui, on est dans un
So
tout autre contexte.
now
On
we
a
are
vu
in a
tout à l'heure
completely
avec
different
le
context. We
représentant
saw
de l'Organisation
with Leonard
internationale de
Dahl
migration qu'on a
just
une grande
now that there is a great
diversité de
diversity
migrants.
of
Mais
migrants.
concentré
But before
vraiment sur le
really
cœur du
focusing
sujet
on
méditerranéen,
this topic in the
j'ai essayé de
Mediterranean,
montrer très
I will try
rapidement à partir de cartes de
and
mon
show you
atlas
very quickly
2016
from that
que c'est un
map,
phénomène à
which
la
is in
fois
my
global
2016
et
book, that it
structurel
is at the same
vers
time a
l'Europe. Même si
global and
aujourd'hui,
structural
il y
phenomenon
a
towards
autant
Europe,
de
even though
flux
today
dans le monde
there
qui
are
vont vers le nord
as
que vers
many
le sud.
flows in the
Le
world
sud de
that
la
go
planète est une
northwards
grande terre de
as those
migration
that go
également,
southwards.
d'une part parce que certains
The
endroits
south
du
is
nord sont
also
difficiles à franchir
a place
et
of
donc il y a un
migration.
trafic des
On the
morts
one
en
hand,
quantité. On a eu
because it's
30 000
hard to
morts
reach
aux
the
portes
north.
de l'Europe
There have
depuis
been
la fin des années
30,000 deaths at the gates
1990,
of
donc il y a une
Europe
certaine
since
indifférence des Européens.
the 90s. The Europeans have been
2015.
indifferent to it. In 2015, there have been 3,000 deaths, and so many flows go towards south because it's easier, even though they have fewer rights there. The Gulf countries attract people to work, and there are also the environmentally displaced people who go from south to south. There are also emerging countries in the south. So Europe is not at all the only destination in the world for migrants. And unlike what many Europeans think, they think that they are being conquered, being invaded by those newcomers. That's not true. So it's a global phenomenon. It was said earlier, it is a phenomenon that characterizes the world. The world is moving. We have 244 international migrants, 740 million internal migrants. Only in China there are 240 million internal migrants in China. So, and also, we see that these flows circulate throughout many countries in the world. So migrations have got globalized. There is a kind of universalization of the right to leave one's country. So, not only after the fall of the Iron Curtain, but also in China and Africa, And in many areas in the world, people have got the right to leave their countries. So the right to leave has got universalized, whereas the right to enter a country has been narrowed down. So that reduces into trafficking, into dealing, into passage offer, irregular passage offers. Many countries of departure have become countries of welcome. Those are the southern countries, the countries that are at the gates of Europe, in the south of the Mediterranean. And this globalized migration has also become regionalized. In all those regions of the world that I have framed in circles, there are more migrants that come from the same region than migrants that come from elsewhere. For example, in Latin America, most migrants are Latin Americans. For example, they come from the Andes and they go to Chile or other countries in South America. And also some come from Mexico or Central America. In Europe, we are in a Euro-Mediterranean migratory space. Most of them come from countries around the Mediterranean and also from Eastern European countries, which are part of the free movement area in the EU or not. Same applies to Russia. The flows of migrants in Russia come from former USSR and also Central Asia. So that in Southeast Asia, most migrants come from Southeast Asia, and in Australia, the dream of a country with only white migration has been over for a long time. So a globalizing and regionalizing of migration, which matches some structural factors, for example, the inequalities of human development, in specifically sub-Saharan Africa. Also demographic perspectives. Median age in Europe, 40. In the 50s, it was 28. On the southern banks of the Mediterranean, the median age is 25, and in sub-Saharan Africa, 19 years old. So Europe is aging, which is also a reason for migration, because there are needs for specific workforce, workers, which are related to the aging of the Europeans. There are certain professions that you cannot exercise when you're 85. And also, the Mediterranean has been a great area for exchange and trade and conflict as well. And now there is a fault line, an economic, social, and political fault line. And the migrants reduce those fault lines through their migrations, through their mobility, through the networks that they build up on both parts of the Mediterranean. Also, the inequality of the right to leave. The people that we saw on boats in those pictures earlier are people that cannot enter legally a country. For example, if you take the example of tourists, there is 1 billion international tourists nowadays. But if you want to move without a visa for 3 months, there is a great inequality. And that is even truer if you are a migrant. Migrant means when you travel for more than a year. That's the international definition. For example, if you're English or Finnish or French, you can circulate freely in 171, 72 or 73 countries. Whereas if you're Russian, without a visa, you can only travel in 92 countries. If you are from Somalia, Eritrea or Afghanistan, you can only travel without a visa in maybe 5 countries. You are a complete migratory risk for political and economic reasons. So the inequality is there. So this inequality leads not only to flows of refugees, but also to trafficking and dealing and smuggling, because the right to mobility is one of the least shared rights in the world. Here you can see those traffics. The conflicts have become structural around Europe. Europe is surrounded by countries which are in conflict, and those countries are often related to Europe for historical reasons, for colonial reasons, for linguistic reasons. So there is a shared past, and also there have been some disentanglements around Europe, ethnic disentanglements which have happened, and for that reason many people consider Europe as a main migration destination for them. Also, Europe is quite close to those people that are undergoing crisis or war. So this is just a chart to show the aging of the population, and Europe has put up barricades. So there is a gap between the reality of the current flows. There were 1.2 million asylum seekers in Europe last year, and usually it was around 220,000. In 2014 it was 625,000. It was twice that in 2015. So the policy around migration has become more and more focused on safety, because the public opinion does not accept that reality, although it is a reality. So this is an example of the militarization of the border in the enclave of Ceuta in Spain, in the north of Morocco. Morocco is transforming into an immigration country because those people cannot leave Morocco once they have reached it. Another example is the border between Greece and Turkey. According to the report of the UN Refugee Committee, most people have entered through Greece in 2015 across the Greek islands, which are closer to Turkey than to Greece, especially the northern islands, for example, Lesbos, Kos, and Samos. We hear about them almost every day on the radio because there have been a lot of deaths around those islands and a lot of newcomers. So they are the target of asylum seekers, those islands, and they're also the targets of the smugglers. And what struck public opinion was that picture of the little Syrian 3-year-old boy who was found dead on the coast of Turkey in Bodrum because his ship there had been a shipwreck. So the Europeans then, when they saw that picture, became aware that this was just the same child as the one they had in their own families, and that there was an inequality, a strong inequality between that child's state and the fate of European children. And they started to question Europe's immigration policies. And then there was in September Angela Merkel's speech, who said Germany is ready to welcome 800,000 migrants. And then there was also an attempt to share the amount of migrants amongst the European countries. I don't know if there are any Turks here, but Turkey has received 3 million people on its territory, essentially Syrians, but also Iraqis, Afghans. 6 million Afghans have left their country since the end of the 70s, let me remind you. And those Syrians have also been received. 1 million of them have been received in Lebanon, and another 600,000 in Jordan. So Turkey is not only a great country of departure, but has become a great country of reception and of transit. Many Syrians would like to come to Europe, but Turkey has signed the Geneva Convention on Asylum, but has not signed the geographic extension to non-Europeans, which means that many Syrians are trying to join Europe either because they already have family in Europe or because they want to stay to have a longer or more stable stay. So there have been a lot of departures towards Greece, also via land. You can see that on the map there through Thrace. There are many passages in spite of the barbed wires. This is called the Balkan route. Usually, people don't want to stay in Greece. Greece are in crisis, as we all know. But they tried to take the Balkan route and cross the border in order to join the ex-Yugoslavia states, in order to enter Europe through Slovenia or into Austria or through Croatia into Italy. Many Eastern European countries have closed their borders last year in order to protect themselves of those new flows. They built barbed wires around their national borders. For example, Hungary started, and then other countries from Eastern Europe followed suit. So there is a fault line that got built in Europe. Those countries which only Germany was willing to share the burden of receiving the migrants. When Mr. Juncker suggested the burden sharing, people were reluctant to accept his proposition. And many Eastern countries have said, we already have refugees. It's true, Hungary got 90,000 asylum seekers in 2015, which is more than France, but they said, we don't want any more. So there was a fault line that started to happen, and that fault line is maybe due to the fact that those countries have become sensitive to those issues only recently, unlike other European countries which have been sensitized to this issue for a longer time. And those countries in the East have not known all the debates we've had in Europe in the past 30 years around living together, cosmopolitanism, multiculturalism, and all the fights against discrimination. I think that this phenomenon also plays a role together with the rise of the extreme right in those Eastern European countries. Another element of this crisis is that the fact that in Libya, the change of the situation in Libya, between 1990 and 2000, Libya was a lock against Europe. It was the only Maghreb country which was not a country of departure, it was a country of immigration. They have few people and they have lots of oil and gas, so people immigrated into Libya from the sub-Saharan areas in order to work in Libya. And Libya had many agreements with Europe where they would accept people being sent back to Libya, people that had been rejected from Europe, and Libya had as a mission to control undocumented workers and asylum seekers. They got money for it in exchange for that, and they got infrastructures, and Mr. Gaddafi had become someone that you could hang around again, according to those Europeans. So it had become a kind of distant border for Europe. They had retention centers there, and they had centers where people could be sent back to. But then, when the Libyan crisis happened, the situation changed. There was a political chaos, and Libya has become a great country of trafficking, of migrant trafficking. And since it's a big country with a large sea area, there are many ships that reach Italy or Greece coming from Libya. So Libya did the dirty job of controlling Europe's external boundaries, but now it doesn't do it anymore. And now Europe has turned towards another partner, Turkey. Turkey has received many Syrians, and not only Syrians. So Turkey today is the ideal partner for Europe, because Europe cannot manage the situation in a decent way, because we have many dead people, and lots of tools have been created to control borders, especially in the Mediterranean. There are the visas that I mentioned, but also the Frontex system, the pooling of police forces in European countries in order to control Europe's external boundaries and borders. And Frontex, the budget for Frontex has kept increasing. Anytime there were 400 or 500 dead in the Mediterranean, Frontex has increased its budget, but we still cannot manage the situation. So that's why we turn to Europe's neighbors. Today it's Turkey. Turkey made an agreement with the European Union in March this year. There are three main elements for Turkey in this agreement. First, the suppression of visas for Turks coming into Europe. Turkey has a negative migratory balance, because it means more Turks are coming back to Turkey than Turks leaving Turkey. So they are asking for visas to be suppressed, and that has been granted them. And then also the negotiations for Turkey's admission into Europe have been reopened, and Turkey have asked for 6 billion euro to take care of the newcomers. And there is a kind of weird exchange that has been done, one against one, 72,000 people, Syrians. They send one Syrian into Europe, and then they accept in exchange for that person another person, an asylum seeker that has been rejected, and there is an exchange going on there. So it's a kind of carpet dealer deal. Similar to the negotiations which had happened with Libya, but this is designed at helping manage the flows of migrants in Mediterranean, and the idea is to limit the increase of migrants into Greece, but the flows into Italy have started increasing again. Lampedusa, the island, has seen a lot more migrants coming in again, and all those islands in the Mediterranean are in a very complex and contradictory situation, because they live on fishing and tourism, but they also have to welcome and receive newcomers. So this represents a difficulty for the inhabitants of those islands, which are also very dependent on tourism. There have been a lot of deaths for a long time around Morocco and Spain, and then in Italy, and today around Greece and Turkey. So those deaths in the Mediterranean are one of the dark points of this situation. There are other black points. There is the Calais business as well. I don't know if I can show Calais on the map. Yes, Calais is here. It's in the narrowest place between France and England. There are 13 kilometers in Gibraltar between Europe and Africa and Morocco. And in Calais, let me see. Well, whatever. It's up here at the top of the map. So there are passages, and there is a kind of favela that started 20 years ago in Calais. People camping there, people who want to go to the UK, lots of Syrians, people from Iraq and Afghanistan, people who want to go into the UK and do not want to go anywhere else in Europe. And that's difficult because the asylum law in Europe means wants your application to be treated in the first country you set foot in Europe, and those people in Calais want their application to be treated in the UK. So that's why they want to join the UK at all costs. So this is an endless crisis because the UK has not signed the Schengen agreements, so there is no free movement of people between France and the UK, which means that those migrants are stuck in those camps around Calais. And in France, there have been many attempts to, as they said, eradicate what they call now the jungle in Calais, which is a camping site under tents or building site houses, and they try to move it, to convince some of those migrants to ask for asylum apply for asylum in France. But it's very difficult given the situation. On the one hand, France are paying the fact that England have given us the control of the border for those who want to join the UK, because France has to stop them at their border. And also the political situation with the extreme right means that this is a strong target for the extreme right to campaign around Calais, claiming that there is an invasion going on. So I want to insist on the Mediterranean crisis. The migrants' profiles, as Leonard Doyle said earlier, are profiles profiles that are more and more difficult to manage, because those are what are called mixed flows. Many migrants are people who both apply for asylum but also come to work. So there are three types of flows in the Mediterranean. First, we have from Maghreb to Europe. That's the big circle on the left. Those are work flows, but some of these people could also apply for asylum because they come from countries which are mismanaged, where the government does not respect human rights at all. And then secondly, there are flows that come from that are the result of the Balkan crisis. Those flows look more like ethnic disentanglements. There was the Kosovo crisis, the ex-Yugoslavia crisis, and then there are still ethnic disentanglements going on in that area. And then there is also the importance of the migration from Albany. It's the second nationality in Italy. We have also seen many freighters in Italy that started in the 90s in Italy. But now there aren't anymore because it's not allowed anymore. But many people go through Albania to smuggle people into Europe. And then thirdly, there is the eastern part of the Mediterranean, the Middle East, which has always been rather a migration of refugees. There was the Lebanese crisis. There were the 6 million Palestinians who live outside their countries. Then there is the Syrian crisis nowadays and Iraq. So that's another profile. But this being said, more and more in the Mediterranean, there are flows which are called mixed flows, which are hard to deal with because often they're not considered as refugees. So we have a context of that really makes asylum a lot heavier. And the solution to solve that question would be, as was done in the past, to give more possibilities to enter a country legally for reasons of work, and that would alleviate the burden of asylum applications and would enable us to manage better the profiles that come in. But this is difficult in Europe because countries have tensed up around the issue of refugees. In France, there have been very few newcomers in reality. There were 62,000 asylum seekers in 2013. 63,000 in 2014, 79,000 in 2015. That's very little, but many people also have settled down again, coming back from Germany. So there is, in the public opinion, an idea that it's an invasion, although it's not the case. There are many places receiving facilities which are not full. And so on the whole, all the people who are afraid of Syrians coming into little towns, little provincial towns, or people from Sudan, well, those people have realized that those migrants coming in were absolutely delightful people, and that it was a pleasure to have them. So outside, except Germany, there is no political will to welcome migrants, and that's one of the problems. And then there is also the focus on fear, which is carried by populist discourses out of fear. And so those people are afraid, and this is due to a lack of knowledge. I think it is important to really inform people, because fear is based on ignorance, and migratory issues have for a long time been considered a minor subject on the international scene. So many people really don't know much about what really goes on and follow the simplistic discourses of many political parties. I won't insist on that, but let me show you figures from Southern Europe. We see that migration is not as important as it is said to be, because there are also many people who are in an irregular situation. But Romanians are the first nationality in Spain and in Italy. People from Albania are the first nationality nationality in Greece and in Italy, and so on. And those are due to neighborhood phenomena. And those have been particularly important in southern Europe, which used to be a land of departure and which became a land of arrival. They have had to set up immigration and asylum policies very quickly, in a not very planned way. And also for the southern Mediterranean, those countries were essentially lands of departure. They still are, but they have become also lands of welcome. And they are setting up policies, immigration policies, but it takes a long time. And in those countries, migrants really have few rights. There are many other sensitive topics, for example, the Roms, but I will not insist on that. Migrations on the whole have been migrations going back and forth, because for them the borders have got opened up, even though in the 90s an invasion was announced. But again, people were saying there will not be an invasion, there will be just a migratory circulation. So those thoughts of invasion did not really happen in reality. I would like to add that Europe is at risk of losing its values with the crisis of the refugees' arrival, because there was a lack of solidarity between European countries, and solidarity is one of the fundamental values of the European Union. It's even written down in the Lisbon Treaty as one of the main values of the EU. So we've seen a lack of solidarity first between the North and the South. The northern countries kind of despised the way in which southern countries received newcomers, and then there's also a lack of solidarity between the East and the West, because the Eastern countries have not accepted the figures for migrants that the EU had suggested to them, and they hid between their sovereignty, and they did not contribute. And another value, which is also questioned by this crisis, it's the respect for human rights. We can see that in the way immigration policies are being implemented, very often those human rights have been denied, and not only recently, but also through the policies that were characterized by a spirit of security and dissuasion. So the question for Europe is to accept itself as a land of immigration, which is not the case yet. Europe has become a land of immigration, but people have to see it that way in order to live together better. There you go.